All right, let's get started. Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for being here with us this morning, or afternoon, whatever time it is for you. My name is Charlie Grosso, and I'm the founder and executive director for a nonprofit called Hello Future. We work in education for adolescent refugees. Today, we're joined by Mohammed Fatih, our country director, and Aymen Taha, a program specialist in international development with specialties in childhood development, in youth development, and livelihood programming. Thank you so much for being here. I'm supposed to say this, yes. So this event is presented in partnership with Skoll World Forum as part of their ecosystem day, and the title of this conversation is Preventing a Lost Generation, Refugee Teens in the 21st Century Economy. So there are only 32% of refugee teens achieve secondary education, with 84 million refugees worldwide, and that number is now close to 90 million. Protracted stays lasting many, many, many years. A child can grow into adulthood with ever only knowing the confines of a refugee camp. Refugee education is an urgent need of innovation. What are the essential human skills that one needs beyond the 3 R's? Reading, writing, and arithmetic. How do we prepare them for this rapidly changing 21st century economy? And how can we deliver the learnings and skills as quickly as possible? So I'm grateful to have all of you here with us for this conversation. So let me make some introductions first. My name is Charlie Grosso, once again, and I'm the founder and executive director. Prior to founding Hello Future in 2016, I had 20 years of experience as an entrepreneur, founding my first business at 20. And I had a long career as an advertising photographer with clients such as Lexus, Nike, JCPenney, Comedy Central, and more. I worked as a creative director for the likes of Paramount, Variety, and FX. I've traveled and toured in over 80 countries as a documentary photographer before founding Hello Future. I'm an Edmund Hillary Fellow, a Provost Leadership Moonshot Fellow, and a member of the Acumen Foundry. And I serve as an advisor to several startups, including Pretty Deadly and Squawk Squad. Storytelling has been a through line in my very unconventional career, and it underwrites the how we think about what we teach at Hello Future. Hello Future is a culmination of a lifelong passion for innovation and social justice. Aymen Taha is an international development practitioner with expertise in early childhood development, youth development, and livelihoods programming with demonstrated experience in high quality delivery of projects in Iraq and across the Middle East. Since May 2001, he has been serving as education and youth consultant with Sesame Workshop, advising on programming and implementation in Iraq and the Middle East. Previously, Aymen served as early childhood coordinator in Iraq for the International Rescue Committee and advisor and early childhood development advisor for Iraq, Syria, Lebanon, and Jordan with focus on meeting the learning and development needs of Syrian refugees. He has also led programming with Mercy Corp as Iraq Youth Sector Lead, overseeing youth programming. And he currently is based in Raleigh, North Carolina. Thank you so much for joining us, Aymen. And lastly, Mohammed Fatih. Mohammed has 10 years of experience working in the humanitarian field with a focus on child protection. As a lead of Suleimania Child Protection Working Group, he has helped improve the coordination amongst humanitarian agencies. Through his work at STEP UK in partnership with the Kurdish regional government, Mohammed helped establish the first ever foster care system, bringing vulnerable children out of care homes and into loving families. A graduate of Suleimania University with a BA in English, he's passionate about social impact work, the nuance of magic in language and translation. He's a published author with one work in translation and 2 children's books. And him and his wife founded the first children's only bookshop in Kurdistan. Thank you so much for joining us. So we're a small gathering today, and I really want to take advantage of that. So I want this to be a conversation, and rather than just the 3 of us here telling you what we know. So feel free to drop your questions for us in the chat, and we'll make this as conversational as possible. So to kick it off, I have a poll for you. Mohammed, will you launch the poll?
So
no, Mohammed did not launch the poll. I had a poll for the audience like baked in. I will see if I can launch it.
Okay.
Oh wait, I see the poll. Do you guys see a poll on your screen?
Not yet.
No.
Okay, well, let's do this old-fashioned way in the chats. On average, what do you think is the duration of protracted state? How long does a refugee get stuck in a country that is not their own before they can return? All right, well, we have some well-knowledge experts. Yes, they are debated numbers. The IRC is putting that number at close to 20 years. And I see from Carrie that the World Bank redid this research, and the World Bank is citing 11 to 12 years. So irrespective, whether be it a decade or two, that is a lifetime. Very good point, Carrie. It is true, depending on the reason for the displacement. Yes. So I'd love to introduce you to some of our lovely youth, a selection of, it's a lovely youth. Mohammed, will you share your screen? Thank you. These are some of our students. There's Darsing, who wants to be a surgeon, Aljan, who wants to be an engineer, Hiwa, who wants to be an astronaut, Ayan, who is aspiring to be a game designer, Fadia, who wants to be a computer programmer, and Rad, who wants to be a pharmacist. Thank you, Mohammed. These are some of our students, and I think it's important for us to remember that there are faces and dreams that is attached to this very, very large number of, whether it be at 84 million or, you know, upwards of 90 million if we add into the recent numbers from Ukraine. So as they all have dreams and aspirations, but there's no shortage of challenges. So Aymen and Mohammed, can you give us a little bit of context on what kind of challenges are in their way in becoming architects and engineers and game designers and astronauts?
Sure. Thank you, Charlie. Like where one could start, there's so many. So I met a young person in an urban refugee camp where we work here in Kurdistan in Iraq. And this young man has grown up, like you said, only knowing the confines of the refugee camp at Arbet, because he was so young when they came from Syria. And he said, I only know Suli, so and the refugee camp. So he doesn't know, he didn't have any role. He was never asked like what happened and why he was displaced or became a refugee. He had no role, no choice, no say, and that's his life now. And now he's, like you could say, maybe, hopefully not, but stuck there. So what kind of program is offered there? What kind of courses? What kind of like life skill? What is this what help is there for this young man to grow up and to build himself, so that he builds his life, he builds a life that every one of us aspires to provide for his family in the future, to have a job or something that is he's dreaming of, like the slides you just showed. So there's so many things that is barriers to these young youth, for young people to grow and to achieve or to thrive in their life. I'll stop here, and Aymen.
Thank you, Mohammed, and thank you, Charlie. Hello, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon to all of you. So just to add to what Mohammed and Charlie already shared, we all know, working in countries in the Middle East, for example, where we know governments and countries are dealing with the Syrian refugee crisis. A lot of these governments, well, we'll start with the camps. So a lot of these camps were built to be a temporary solution, were for 1 year or 2 years situation. This ended up being now closing to 10 years of displacement. So many of these camps are not equipped, they're not designed to host this many refugees, and they're not equipped with a lot of the basic needs that a young person needs, a child needs, women. So the issue here is the planning for this crisis, or the response to this crisis. It's been and has been emergency since the beginning, and unfortunately until now, there's no permanent solution for a lot of these refugees. At the same time, government and host countries are dealing with their own issues, dealing with providing jobs, socioeconomics, conflict, education, providing good education to their own citizens, and keeping up with technology and innovation, let alone having an influx of, in some cases, millions of refugees coming to their borders. So therefore, refugees in host countries, in many cases, are not allowed to work. They rely on NGOs and aid organizations to provide the basic needs for them. And of course, this links to funding and politics, and in many ways, refugees are left vulnerable, uncertain of their future, and also in many ways, they're not their basic needs are not met. On top of that, and I hate to start this conversation with kind of a bleak statement, but a lot of refugees and IDPs, as well as dealing with all these challenges, are dealing with discrimination, stereotyping, xenophobia, racism, stigma of being a refugee. We all forget, at one point of time, all of our ancestors were refugees in one way or another. So with dealing with all these challenges, a lot of organizations like Hello Future are kind of paving the way for more innovative and more technological support, I would say. So I'll leave it here for the challenges. There are many challenges, of course, but I don't want to go in depth into that. Go ahead, Charlie.
Thank you, Mohammed. Thank you, Aymen. Yes, the challenges are numerous. So one of the things that we know, and from what from Aymen and Mohammed has shared with us, is that there simply is a lack of programming for teenagers. Humanitarian organizations tend to focus on young kids, so grade K through 6, for example, and then for heads of households, but leaving these very formative years of teenage years to be much just kind of a blank slate, right? And the teens become even more vulnerable for the lack of programming. The young men are vulnerable to radicalization, and the girls are vulnerable to early marriages. What are some of the solutions that you guys have seen that encourages teen girl attendance in continue their education instead of opting out and marrying early?
Thank you. I think One of the very positive things that we at Hello Future do and very excited about is that 80% of our courses, 80% attendance are by young girls. 80% of our students are girls. This is a high percentage, and it soon will have effect on the level of education in that camp that we are working. And this is just not by chance. It's part from our culture. Our families, we are conservative. We do not send our girls just like that to a course or to an NGO to educate. NGOs usually are not very much liked. So unless the families trust that NGO, so we intentionally go out to the community, we intentionally build the relationship with the families, with the fathers, with the mothers, with the aunties, so that they know what we are doing. They trust us, they trust our programs, and they see the benefit of the programs through their kids. They come back, they give us that feedback. And that cultural understanding really helps. I was saying to one of our staff on the way back to the city, in few years, hopefully if we continue like this, I'm seeing that I'm expecting a high level of skills, and skilled youth and young people will come out from that camp, and will hopefully be able to contribute to the economy and to their families, hopefully if they're properly allowed to work. So yeah.
Yes, and so that's something that's really interesting that we have seen in the 4 consistent years that we've been programming in our Black camp, right? Is that the skills that in which we teach the students are shared, right? We survey our kids, and something like 75% of our students would teach any given skills that we have taught them to either a parent or a sibling or a friend. So there's a viral effect that is taking place as well in the informal knowledge share that happens, which happens in any community and society. We learn from each other all the time. We're just not necessarily have put a framework around it, right? But these are kind of new ideas, both big and small, and the kids share with each other. So then, even in the 5 years that we have been in the camp, we see an increase in overall digital literacy from the students that come in class after class, right? So the digital literacy baseline for our initial pilots in 2017 is vastly different than the cohort that have just started with us. So
Exactly.
That's something really exciting that I don't know it is particularly talked about in our sector as a whole, in the exponentiality of these soft skills in which we teach our students.
And I want to chime in a bit about that, because I worked in many organizations in the past, and I've seen a lot of programs come and go, and a lot of these programs come and they have the emergency kind of mindset, get out kind of situation, where they come into a camp, they come into a place where, whether it's responding to the Syrian refugee crisis, for example, in Kurdistan region, or in Turkey, Jordan, Lebanon, Syria, Northeast. The situation is very emergency kind of dominant, where they provide programs that are short cycle, short vision, providing very basic skills a lot of young people they might need. However, we'll provide a version that is short and very basic, so we can say, a lot of organizations can say, like, we reached 3,000 people, we reached 5,000 young people in this camp. And what Charlie and her team are doing is totally different than that. It's basically providing a vision for how to work with a smaller cohort of youth, providing them with digital literacy, basic digital skills, storytelling, media literacy, critical thinking, problem solving, leadership skills, financial literacy, entrepreneurship. These skills lead to independence, empowerment, confidence, and give these young people an opportunity to be an active member of their community by, having positive, meaningful engagements, not only with each other, but with their larger community, and being able to reach that independence that I believe that should be the goal for all of us working on the refugee crisis in host communities or in host countries.
Absolutely. And the depth of programming in which we offer, right? Over the course of over 5 courses, there's 270 hours of total in-person instruction time, right? So here's a couple things that I think in our current day and age doesn't get enough emphasis, right? I still believe in-person instruction matters. These are young people who have gone through a lot of trauma in which they have never had an opportunity to process, both because of the culture and because of the lack of support and mental health services, right? That they haven't had an opportunity to process. So the in-person interaction with a local instructor speaking in their native language is extremely important. It's not something that you can kind of be like, oh, well, here's an online learning platform, right? And you just plug it in whenever it works for you. That's not going to achieve the kind of results that we want for our students. 270 hours baked over 5 courses is achievable, but they're going to need to want to be committed, right? And that's another aspect that is really important to us, because both of us have to be in, right? We have to be committed as an organization to providing the best that we can for our students, but our students also need to want to show up as well, right? And so, and that's kind of how we get the best outcome in which we do, and the kind of outcome that we get. There's a lot of programming that focus on a single skill set, whether it be a vocational skill set such as tailoring, hairdressing, auto mechanics, or coding, right? Those are single skill sets that are not necessarily transferable skills, especially not in the kind of the manual vocational given area. And my view is that when we limit the young people's choices to these kind of singular moments, we're still depriving them the agency in which displacement has robbed them of, right? They've been run out of their home and country. They can no longer make decisions for themselves because of any numbers of geopolitical and local political issues, right? And as NGOs, for us to come in and say, okay, now your livelihood choices are these 5 things, right? It just kind of further exasperates the sense of like, okay, right? And people want choices, and people want to make choices for themselves, which is why we have designed a program that focuses on transferable skills, both soft and hard, right? So that they can decide what they want to do with these skills that they have, and really kind of create options for them, right? So it's really about teaching them how to think and how to choose and how to manage their lives, rather than this kind of singular choices in which a lot of other programming wants to funnel them through. Aymen, did you want to give us an example of a short-term short vision program?
Sure, absolutely. So in 2000, I believe in 2015, between 2015 and 16, there was the Syrian refugee crisis was of course, happening, and ISIS occupied third of Iraq. I was in Erbil, and so there was a huge influx of refugees that came into in 2014, that came into the Kurdistan region. There was many camps set up in that area. It was a huge response effort by all the organizations, and a lot of people work day and night. And so this is not to say that the work that we did and the work that a lot of the humanitarian organizations did, was not useful or was not important. It was very important for a lot of refugees. We provided as much basic needs as possible, like food, shelter, water, providing safe spaces for children, providing safe spaces for women, and trying to kind of respond as much as possible to this very huge issue. However, a couple of years after the emergency kind of settled, and the dust settled, and the camps are set up, and the thinking and the mentality of emergency remained. So in a lot of these, like people start saying, like, what about recovery? Right now, let's talk about what comes next. And a lot of these programs remained into that, way of thinking of providing livelihood opportunities, for example. And Charlie provided a really great example of, tailoring or hairdressers. I was involved in a program where we went to communities and we're like, okay, so what do you need? What kind of skills do you need to build? And a lot of them looked at the options around, and they're like, we only can do specific jobs, and we can only allow to do these things, which is very narrow, very kind of, independent in a way where like they don't get support from anyone. And whether it's hairdressing, whether it's tailoring, whether it's mechanic work for men and all that stuff. So and these organizations kind of love that approach because it's a very clear skill set that they can come in and build it and leave it. It usually lasts for 2 to 3 weeks, and they have certain level indicators where things are clearly measured based on output, not long-term outcome. And so in many cases, you see a lot of these young people come into these courses for the incentives, and the incentives in many ways were, okay, we'll provide you cab money, for example, or provide you this or provide you that. And they come in, they attend the courses, and they leave. What we try to do, and I think Charlie and her team are like really diving into that concept of like trying to get young people first to recover from their own trauma, and to say like, here is a look to your future. You can don't think about what's going on right now. Don't think about what's happening outside of the camp, or don't think about what's going on with your current state. Think about the future. A lot of these young people, due to prolonged trauma, prolonged stress, they lose the ability to even imagine their future, which is unbelievably sad. Imagine a young person of 14, 15, and they say, like, what do you want to be in the future? And they're like, future, what future? I'm thinking about tomorrow right now, thinking about today. And to get them to that state of saying, like, I want to be a surgeon, I want to be a doctor, it's unbelievably empowering for these young people. Just imagining what you can be, or imagining a future, a brighter future, a better future, is incredibly empowering for these young people. So providing psychosocial support, mental health, and recovery from trauma, then provide the basic skills that you talked about: digital literacy, basic skills, storytelling, media literacies, leadership skills, entrepreneurship, which comes in stages to provide that young person kind of the ability to kind of develop as they go. And instead of coming in and be like, here is a dose of 2 weeks of this skill and see you later. And we report that, 3,000, 5,000, 10,000 people were reached, And so I think a lot of organizations now are realizing this is not working. A lot of these young people who received a lot of these skills in the past are not finding jobs, are not finding their pathway to education, for example. So what is the result? What is the end result? And this refugee crisis that we are dealing with is not going anywhere. A lot of these refugees are just staying in these countries for the foreseeable future. So yeah, I mean, there are a lot of examples of that, but I think once a lot of organizations are once they start to think about innovation, keeping up with what's going on around the world, in terms of coding and using technology, a lot of these refugees will, and it's a good change, because a lot of these refugees are confined to their camps, but with digital and with virtual, they can go outside of their camp through some of these skills that they will develop.
Yeah, I just want to jump in. Just the last point, the virtual, we actually give them the headset, VR headset, and they try that for themselves, and just to experience that. I want to ask you, Aymen, if you can elaborate, like we do storytelling from development point of view. Can you elaborate like how storytelling helps with stigma and trauma? Because trauma usually we don't talk about it in our culture. We don't, there's something taboo. So,
Yeah.
but we do storytelling from development point of view.
Yeah, that's a really good question and really good point you're making, Hamid. So in the Middle East, and countries like Iraq and Syria, Lebanon, Jordan, talking about mental health and psychology, talking about trauma, talking about the effects of trauma, PTSD, it's taboo. It's not something that people want to talk about or they want to admit even. And so in many programming, we were like kind of left with that dilemma of like, how do we kind of address this issue, but at the same time, we don't want to kind of have people kind of shut down or like not respond to programming. So storytelling is a great tool to recover from trauma and gain empowerment and confidence. It's a really great opportunity for a young person to tell their own story, to tell their own, to kind of provide their own perspective. We hear and we see refugees from different lenses. As a practitioners, we go to camps or we go to neighborhoods where there are a lot of refugees, and we see them from our own perspective. And then TV, news media show them in a certain way. And so people in their homes looking at refugees, they develop their own kind of perception about a refugee. But the power of having a refugee young person tell their own story from their own perspective, it's incredibly empowering to them. And at the same time, it tells a better story because it's that much authentic and it's that much real that a lot of young people are trying to convey to the rest of the world, where we are, yes, refugees, but we have dreams. We want to be this, and we want to be an astronaut. I want to do this. I love a quote from a Hello Future student who's 16. Her name is Nowruz, and she said, "We feel empowered to take the problems in our own community and not wait for NGOs to come and help us." This is incredibly empowering. Like you're setting, the path or the for these young people to say, I don't need an NGO person to come in and give me a bag of whatever, or to give me a package for the winter or a package for the summer. I can work on my issues. I can talk to my community. I can find a job. I can code. I can take good photos. I can write well. And these skills are incredibly important. But like Mohammed said, we cannot get to these skills unless we address provide psychosocial support, address mental health issues, PTSD, and that is really great to address through storytelling, because you kind of remove the stigma and the taboo-ness of it, because of in the Middle East we grew up with, no, you're you know, as soon as you start talking about mental health and you start talking about like depression, for example, and all that stuff, people are like, no, 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 you're not
Are you
that.
crazy?
Yeah, you're not. And that's why, good luck. If you're in Iraq or Syria, maybe Jordan, but if you're in Iraq, for example, good luck finding a psychologist. You can't. It's really hard to find, like, you go to Google and to Google like a psychologist near me. You're not gonna find one because people are not, they don't believe in that.
Thank you.
Thank you, Aymen. One of the things that I remember so vividly from an early version of our of the storytelling component of our program is so we teach the kind of the standard hero's journey, right? The heroes go through trials and tribulations, but they always kind of, emerge in the end, right? Classic kind of Western narrative framework that underpins all storytellings that has come out of the West. And the students kind of cast themselves as heroes in the stories, and they go on and tell it, right? They can be real, it can be fictional. It tends to be a mixture of a little bit of both. And when they get to the how are they going to triumph, right, is definitely imaginative and fictionalized, right? Because they don't quite understand that part yet. But part of the exercise is just getting them to think about how are they going to get to that end in which they want it to be. And it was incredible to see a classroom of young people who are more or less from the same region in Syria, who have been living in the same camp for 5, 6, 7 years, go to the same school, that are neighbors and friends, and to say to each other, I didn't know that you had the same story leaving Syria as I did. I did not know that you felt the same kind of discrimination at school as I do, right? Just to get a classroom of young people looking at each other and say, like, I had no idea. I thought I was the only one, right? But again, like, they're neighbors and friends and schoolmates, right? So that was always really powerful for me. And on the note of, our work in trying to empower, right? Because that's something we think about a lot, and it's carried out through kind of everything we do, right? NGOs talk about empowering X, Y, and Z all the time. Empowerment is so overused that it almost doesn't mean anything anymore. But what does it really mean for us to empower somebody, right? It means that they feel like they have the agency. They have what it needs to do, what it takes, right? Whether it be the emotional reservoir, the tangible skills, the financial access, right? In order to do the things in which they want to do, right? And I think it's important for us, at least for Hello Future, to feel like we're not dictating what that end goal is, because who am I to tell you, right? But I can help you along the way in equipping you, right, to be truly empowered, right? So one indicator and one framework we present with our students is that to be empowered is that you don't need us. You don't need state actors. You don't need, governmental actors such as ourselves in order to achieve your dreams and your aspirations, right? One of the examples from work we do in that segment is we teach them what's called design thinking, which is a social innovation practice that is very common amongst social entrepreneurs and social innovators. And so we teach it to our students and we say, tell us the community concern that you have. I'm not going to tell you what community concern is. You're going to tell me what your community concern is, right? Because you live in the community. So tell me what you're concerned about with your community. And then we're going to walk you through this design thinking module so that you can come up with some version of a solution. And during COVID, the students have come to realize that there was an artificial goods shortage within the camp itself. So in the beginning of COVID, in like March, April, there was huge case counts in Iran. And Iran is like 200 kilometers away from the camp, and a lot of goods comes through Iran. So even though the shop were stocked with dry goods and stuff, the people were afraid to purchase them because they thought that they could catch COVID by touching the packaging. So the students then went on and executed an awareness campaign. They made posters, they pulled accurate information from the World Health Organizations, and not on the complete like COVID safety protocol, just focused on touch transmission and how long germs live on cardboard, on plastic, on metal, right? So they created these posters, and then they put it up all over town. And this is a camp of 10,000 people, and this is a team of 5 kids that went and executed this. And with that, they saw a dramatic reduction in this artificial stuff shortage, right? The example, you know, it's a little small scale in some capacities, but in extrapolation of it, I think that's super powerful. The kids felt empowered, right? They made positive changes in their community without our help.
Exactly.
So before we kind of open this up to questions, I'm curious to ask the audience. In the US, we talk a lot about future proofing, right? Future proofing for both from robots taking our jobs and anything else, right? I think that idea of future proofing also applies globally, right? Including in the refugee context. So what do you think are the 3 essential skills any young person need in order to face this brave new world that we're all looking at? If you'll put it in the chats, that would be great. Those are some great answers. So we have the assessive veracity of information, so media literacy, the ability to ask for help and to self-advocate, digital literacy, resilience and creativity, empathy, critical thinking, collaboration, digital literacy, critical thinking, independence, lifelong learning. So, and also I would say probably a learning to learn as a spin on that, because learning to learn is a skill. A growth mindset approach, absolutely. So I think for our last question before we open up for Q&A, Aymen, if you had to rewrite how we measure outcome versus output, what would ideal outcomes to be? If you had to just redesign programs altogether, right? And we're not tied to the kind of the standard metrics of how we think about outcome. How would you redesign it?
Well, I think, you know, we have to think about long term, in my opinion. Like there are, you know, the focus sometimes is about, you know, how to measure immediate, you know, or intermediate results, and how to talk about, you know, are we on the right track? Is this project successful? But I think the way that it should be done, in my opinion, is to measure the long-term impact and an outcome that can be, you know, like the way that you described how these young people, for example, found a solution for an issue. So that's your critical thinking, problem solving, leadership skills kind of indicator, that they saw an issue, they found the solution, and they've executed the solution, and they've led kind of their community to a really great solution. So I mean, I believe that it should be long term. It's really hard. I've been to working in organizations for a while, and it's really hard sometimes to measure long term impact, especially if you're dealing with emergencies and dealing with a lot of programs in many ways. But it's long term, in my opinion, is the it's something that we need to kind of start looking at, and it's trying to look at growth level for children, for young people, and finding jobs, finding pathway to education. What can we do better in terms of measuring that development is really important.
Absolutely. Thank you, Aymen. Do you have any thoughts on if we could rewrite the measurement component, Mohammed? What would that be?
I think just quickly, we are all human beings living on one planet, so there's no point in just throwing out ideas like going to a community. Okay, here's your problem. You are like poor you have problem, and here's the solution I propose. First, approach the community, understand them, and see who they are, and understand and try to get them on board to help you solve and help themselves. So that will be very much long lasting. If you are out of the picture, they will still carry on and carry out the solutions and develop it more. So I always try, I hope and try okay, do something for these people that they want to do it, they accept it, not just throw things on them. So and okay, I've done it, and like Aymen said, it's just numbers, and keep donors happy. Sorry.
No, totally. So I love to spend the last few minutes and open this up for questions. Gail, I don't know that I understand your question.
I guess my question is, so one of the kids you profiled wanted to be a pharmacist. What is the path for them to do that? I mean, I know what the path is in my own country and my own culture, but if you're a teen living in a refugee camp and you decide you want to be a pharmacist, which is a perfectly reasonable thing to want to do, how do you get from being cloistered in a way in the refugee camp to getting the training you need to be a pharmacist? I'm just picking pharmacist. You could pick a different career if you wanted to, but something that's not construction, as an example.
Absolutely. So one of the unique things about the KRG region as a whole is that the refugees who live in camp have freedom of movement, right? So they can kind of travel to the city if they're able to. So from our camp is about an hour to the city. They have access to the national university system, right?
Oh.
So they can kind of score high on their final tests, right? Imagine your entire life is predicated on your SAT scores, right? Your academic career is predicated on your SAT scores, right? It would be kind of the equivalent of that. They have a final exam that they have to take. It takes months. This exam is like multiple parts, and the kids spend a lot of time prepping for it. So that is possible. That is a viable pathway, however difficult it may be.
Just adding to that.
Yeah, I just want to add to that. There is, and then Mohammed, please expand on that. There is a language issue in that regard as well, because a lot of the refugees from Syria were schooled in Arabic. The universities in Kurdistan are Kurdish Sorani, which is different than the Kurdish Kurmanji that a lot of people from Northeast Syria speak. So there is also like a language barrier there that kind of hinders a lot of like pathway to education. But Mohammed, please explain.
Yeah, that's true. That's true, Ayman. And yes, Charlie, that's the system. And sadly, I hope this doesn't land badly with some people who don't like to hear this. Sadly, we are more helpful and tolerant towards the Kurds from Syria compared to Kurds from other parts of the other neighboring countries. We've had a other small group of refugees in Kurdistan here, and we've been less helpful towards them. Political pressure, basically. But for the Syrian refugees, the path is available, as Charlie explained. They can be the pharmacist, but later they might have a difficulty starting their own pharmacy under their own name. And later they will have, as of right now, they will have difficulty holding to a managerial position, for example, a lead pharmacist, a lead manager, someone even in private sector. The government here doesn't let them to hold a high position or something like that. So some people go out and achieve it, but some people, like the mass majority, will have difficulty.
And I think the thing to also think about is kids' aspirations change, right? It's not so much whether like he's gonna get to be a pharmacist or a doctor, but I think the important part is that he can picture something else he wants for him, right? And then he's gonna try to take steps towards it, right? Whether he gets deterred along the way, right, because of institutional, state, systematic barriers that becomes impossible for him to overcome. That I think that is going to be true for all people across all worlds, right? But the other thing too is that there are jobs that's coming down the pipe that we haven't even thought about, and young people are inventing jobs that we haven't even thought about, right? There's like people who play video games for a living. I don't know how that works, but like they play video games for a living, right? There's a 14-year-old.
That was my childhood dream, but it never came true.
Right? Right. But now, like, 20 plus years later, it's a viable career, right? There's 14-year-olds trading crypto and is like a millionaire. And you're like, again, how does that happen? Right. So I fully acknowledge the systemic and institutional barriers that are in the way of Hiwa wanting to be an astronaut, right? Even if he was born in the US and she wanted to be an astronaut, like that's a tall order to clear, right? But I think it's less of if I'm going to get her to be an astronaut, but can I keep her fire going so that she keeps on propelling herself forward, right? And can she learn things along the way that would be helpful to her, that will always be helpful to her, right? And it doesn't really matter if she gets to go to space or not. Of course, I hope she gets to go to space because that'd be pretty cool. Absolutely, Laura. Laura said, this is why career advising is so important. Access information about the massive range of careers and jobs every day is completely essential. Absolutely, right? And I think what we see in both in the region and in the sector as a whole, right, is just a lack of exposure, right? Because I'm willing to bet you that if we went into camp today, Mohammed, and said to the kids, like, you can play video games for a living and this is for real, like, we're going to get huge participation rates.
Yes,
right?
like I'll just be a YouTuber and comment on the games.
Right? Like somehow that's a viable job, right? But these kids they're so kind of isolated, kind of geographically, culturally, just an exposure of all things, right? That they can't imagine beyond the things in which they have some kind of exposure to, right? So a pharmacist, a hairdresser, right? Hairdressing, there's a reason why vocational schools gets a lot of uptake, right? Whether it be the incentives that is offered or the fact that they're like, oh yeah, okay, I understand what that is because I've seen it, right? But that doesn't future proof any young person if we just let them do the things in which the 5 jobs that they can name, right? And also I want to see a town that has trained 3,000 hairdressers. Any other questions?
There's a question from Andrew, I think we missed in the chat.
sorry.
What are some key early indicators of success, and given the intense interventions, how are you working to make the problem scalable, replicatable?
So early indicators for us is a couple of different things. So how long does a young person retention? So when we measure retention is the kids sign up for the class and then we have a very kind of short dropout period, if you will, right? After the dropout period, what is our retention rate? Because young people will tell you if this is worth their time or not, right? And if it's not, they're gonna be like, yeah, see you, sucker. It's all good, right? So retention rate is something we measure. For us, it's 100%. And then after that is completion rate. How many students out of this class have completed the assignments in which is given and the criteria in which we set forth to consider you having completed said class? For us is about 82%, which is high. And then after that is the repeat, right? Like how often do we see the kids coming back, right? Going through different programs in our set of 5, right? Referral rates, do they tell their friends, do they tell their siblings, right? And I think again, the friends and sibling component and also the repeat is an indicator of community trust, right? Do we have the community's approval in what we do, right? Because again, that's really important in functioning and being a viable program in any given community. As far as to scaling, we're building out a train-the-trainer model so that we can train other instructors to teach our content and our pedagogy. So our goal is to program with other program implementators in the region, in the field, right? So that where we don't have footprints, we can then introduce and train program partners, existing instructors in our curriculum and in our pedagogy, and help them deliver the program to reach more students. Well, is there any other questions before we wrap up here?
I think good.
Well, thank you all so much for joining us on this Friday morning, afternoon, and a deep gratitude to Aymen and Mohammed for joining me this morning too.
Of course.
Thank you so much, everyone. Thank you, Charlie.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Thank
all.
you.